Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Ever since Katie and Marissa announced that they'd be hosting Jane Austen July again this year, I've been shuffling through my books, wondering how on earth I was going to winnow down my list of books I'd like to read this month. There are more books on my want-to-read list about Jane Austen than I have the ability to read in 1 month, which is, of course, fine because July will roll around again and one can actually read Jane Austen at other times. But today I'm sitting down to talk through my initial thoughts about what I want to read during this month devoted to the celebration of all things Austen. Some are books that I know many of us will be reading, and some might be a little less common. No promises that all of these will get read, but so it goes. I'll go through the official challenges first, then talk about a few other ideas I have, possibly for a Jane Austen July TBR for 2021. Okay, the first challenge is to read one of Jane Austen's 6 novels. Over the years, I've read all of her novels, most of them several times, but Emma and Pride and Prejudice are my 2 favorites. Emma was actually the first Jane Austen book I read when I was 12 or 13, and I absolutely loved it. I may have reread it more than any other book, maybe even more than Jane Eyre, wildly enough. After I read it the first time, I immediately picked up Pride and Prejudice and loved it just as much, although I've not read it quite as often as Emma. Katie and Marissa are hosting a read-along for both of these books, and I'll be participating in both, at least to a degree. At the beginning of the month, I want to listen to the full cast audiobook version of Emma, adapted by Anna Lea and narrated by Emma Thompson, among others. The audio is abridged, and I'm hoping that won't steer me astray for the read-along. I think it'll be okay since I know the book pretty well. In the second half of the month, Katie and Marissa are leading a read-along of Pride and Prejudice. Although I might listen to a bit of the audiobook read by Rosamund Pike, I plan to read it in print. For the last decade or two, I've relied on Black Spine Penguins for all my Austen reading. But this time I'm going to try the annotated Pride and Prejudice from David Shapard. His editions are thick. Austen on one page and notes on the facing page, as so much Shakespeare is printed. After my brief flip through, I have to say I'm a bit disappointed to find that the annotations are often just definitions. For example, there's a section early on where Darcy's reading a book, and then after a conversation among the others in the room, we hear that he was still inflexibly studious. Shapard explains that studious means devoted to books or study, and that, quote, in this case, it means that Darcy is paying full attention to his book. I'm not sure that anyone reading an annotated version of the novels would need that kind of support. I can imagine it might start feeling really intrusive, and if it does, I'll switch back to my trusty penguins. On the other hand, I know that there are certain vocabulary in Austen's period that I more or less know the meaning of, enough to get the point, but which I could probably benefit from learning more literally. We'll see how it goes. Have any of you tried out his editions? Next is the challenge to read something by Jane Austen that is not one of her main 6 novels. I'm going to read her History of England, a short piece she wrote when she was 15 years old or so, poking fun at the national history she had to read in school. It sounds ridiculous and clever. I know my pathetic knowledge of English history, actual English history that is, may mean that I miss some parts of Austen's satire. On the other hand, as an American historian, I've written non-satiric history and can imagine that seeing my discipline, even the late 18th century version of my discipline, skewered by a teenager will be tremendous fun. The third challenge is to read a nonfiction work about Jane Austen or her time, a biography, a work of literary criticism, or a social history, for example. I have 2 different kinds of books here, both of which I know will be very popular choices, and I'm eager to hear what y'all will have to say when you read them. The first is the biography Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Worsley. I've read some of Worsley's other writing and have really appreciated it, but this one will be new for me. My second book that answers the challenge is What Matters in Jane Austen by John Mullan, which has amazing reviews from all of you who have already read it. I believe Katie called it her favorite piece of literary criticism ever about any subject. I'm very much looking forward to both books. The fourth challenge is to read a retelling of a Jane Austen book or something inspired by Jane Austen. Just as I did for the third challenge, I'm going to list two books of differing types that both meet the prompt. The first is Longbourn by Jo Baker, a book I've been thinking about reading since last Jane Austen July before I had a channel. It's a retelling of Pride and Prejudice from the perspective of the servants. It's interesting, many years ago when Downton Abbey first appeared on the small screen, I realized that the Bate sisters thought about the lives of both the wealthy people in the household and those who were in service. Other Victorian authors also considered the workings of class and society and the perspectives of those who were not anywhere near the top. But Jane Austen, not quite so much. So when Downton Abbey came out, I started thinking about the fact that if Austen were writing today, she'd almost certainly have more complex novels braiding a whole slew of new characters and new voices into her narrative. It didn't occur to me that someone else should provide the additions for her. And that is sort of what Jo Baker does in Longbourn. It sounds wonderful. The second book I have for this challenge is not a retelling, but a book inspired by Jane Austen, and that's the imminently forthcoming book by Rachel Cohen, Austen Years, a memoir in 5 novels. This book is a combination of literary analysis and memoir, where the author reads and rereads Jane Austen during a transformative period in her life, when she's learning to be a mother after the birth of her child, and at the same time grieving her father's death. No, I don't yet know why this is not a memoir in 6 novels. Something to discover. The book will supposedly come out here in the States on July 21st, just in time to slip it in at the end of Jane Austen July. I really hope my pre-order arrives in time. Okay, on to challenge number 5. Read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen. Answering this prompt is what may sink me this month. I'm planning to read James Boswell's The Life of Samuel Johnson. But this book does double duty here. To be honest, The Life of Johnson was published a few years before Jane Austen was born, but only a few years. So Boswell is a contemporary to Jane Austen. But Samuel Johnson is the one who may have been the bigger influence on Austen and her novels. Supposedly, Dr. Johnson was one of her favorite writers, and his stress on moral purpose over imagination and ambition shaped what she created. I say this without ever having read anything by or about Samuel Johnson beyond the most simplistic website description, but isn't that idea of moral purpose edging out imaginative ambition sort of the point of, say, Emma? I'm sure when I have read more, I'll be more nuanced about this idea. Perhaps some of you can offer me some guidance in that direction. The 6th challenge is to watch a direct screen adaptation of a Jane Austen book. I have loved many screen adaptations of Emma, but I haven't yet watched the new film version, and I'm eager to see it. A few of my friends have warned me that I might not like the general tone of the film, but that the costumes and the setting are phenomenal, and that the adaptation is quite funny. Honestly, I'm glad I'm not going in with the expectation that this version will be the be-all and end-all of Emma adaptations, because I think this will allow me to relax into it and enjoy it more, even if I have reservations. The final challenge is to watch a modern screen retelling of a Jane Austen book. Although I love the film Clueless and suspect I might not be able to keep myself from watching it this month since I'll be absorbed in Emma, my actual plan is to try out one of the YouTube modern retellings. Probably the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which I'll watch right at the tail end of the month after rereading Pride and Prejudice with the read along. I've never watched any kind of web series, I don't think, and it sounds like fun. Well, this TBR is already much longer than what I think I can actually get read during July, especially given that I have a couple of other reading commitments during the month. I realize that what I might be doing at this point in the video is putting together the bones of my Jane Austen July TBR for 2021. First is a book available in my library as a text, not digital book, and my library has not yet reopened. That book is Jane and Dorothy, a true tale of sense and sensibility, the lives of Jane Austen and Dorothy Wordsworth by Marian Veevers. Dorothy was the sister of Romantic poet William Wordsworth. From what I hear, Veevers talks about the world into which the two women were born, that time of conflict between, quote, heady revolutionary ideas and fierce conservatism, as she says. The joint biography compares the lives and the backgrounds of the two women. It might be a fascinating book to pair with a rereading of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, as well as with a reading of the new biography by Jonathan Bate, Radical Wordsworth, about the life and thinking of William Wordsworth, Dorothy's brother, born just 5 years before Austen herself was born. If any of you have read either Veevers' book or the new Wordsworth biography, I'd love to hear what you think. In 2020, I guess I'll be thinking more about influences on Austen from non-romantic writers, thinking about how Samuel Johnson's commitment to a world of reason rather than emotion affected Austen's novels. So it makes sense to consider the other side next year, the way the development of the Romantic period affected her writing. I'm already looking forward to 2021. Ready, Katie and Marissa? Well, thanks for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.